The night was calm, almost too calm for the busy streets of Los Angeles. A light breeze moved through the palm trees, and the city lights reflected softly on the nearby buildings. Inside one of the grand halls of the charity event, laughter and quiet chatter filled the air. People moved around in sparkling dresses and crisp suits, sipping wine and exchanging polite greetings. The atmosphere was elegant and lively, yet beneath it all, a subtle excitement lingered. Because the event was rumored to host a few surprising guests, Keanu Reeves had arrived quietly, as he often did. Unlike most celebrities, he preferred to stay low-key and observe rather than seek attention. He greeted a few familiar faces and moved through the crowd, nodding politely to people he knew, his calm presence drawing admiration from those around him. There was something about the way he carried himself, humble, thoughtful, and unassuming, that made people feel at ease around him. As he wandered through the hall, something unusual caught his eye. In a quiet corner of the room, away from the chatter and laughter, stood a young girl. She was unlike anyone Keanu had seen before. Her long dark hair flowed over her shoulders, and her pale skin seemed to glow softly under the dim lights. She wore a dress that looked straight out of a fantasy story, black with intricate patterns, giving her a mysterious, almost otherworldly appearance. But what made her truly remarkable was the way she stood, completely still, her posture perfect, her eyes scanning the room with an intensity that felt almost unreal. People around her had noticed her too. Whispers floated through the air. "Who is she?" one woman asked quietly. "She looks like a vampire," someone else murmured, half joking but also genuinely intrigued. Soon a nickname started circulating in hushed tones: the mute vampire queen's daughter. It wasn't meant to be mean, but her silence, combined with her striking appearance, gave her an air of mystery that no one could ignore. Keanu's curiosity was piqued. He was drawn to people who carried themselves with quiet confidence or mystery. He walked closer, careful not to startle her, and offered a gentle smile. "Hello," he said softly, as if speaking too loudly might disturb some invisible spell around her. The girl looked at him, her eyes meeting his with a calm intensity, and gave a faint smile in return. She didn't speak, not a word, just continued to observe the room. Her gaze sharp and aware. Despite her silence, there was something about her that spoke volumes. It was as if every look, every small movement carried meaning. Keanu found himself sitting nearby, quietly watching her, trying to understand her without forcing conversation. It wasn't often that he met someone so intriguing, someone who didn't need words to leave an impression. Around them, the party continued. People laughing and mingling, but in that corner, a quiet bubble of stillness seemed to exist. Created by her mere presence, the whispers around the room grew louder as people speculated about who she might be. Some guessed she was the child of a famous actor, someone who preferred to remain hidden from the public eye. Others thought she might be a model or a performer, someone accustomed to attention yet deliberately choosing to stay quiet. But no one had a clue. The mystery only deepened when the girl occasionally tilted her head or blinked slowly, giving the impression that she was listening, observing, and judging the room in ways others couldn't understand. Keanu, however, didn't pay much attention to the gossip. He was more interested in the girl herself, the way she carried herself, the way her eyes seemed to see things others missed. He offered a few small gestures, a nod, a gentle smile, even a subtle wave, hoping to make her feel welcome without forcing her into conversation. She responded to these gestures with subtle movements, a faint smile, a slight nod, a blink. It was enough to communicate that she had noticed and acknowledged him. The more he observed her, the more Keanu felt a strange connection. There was something human in her silence, something that resonated deeply with him. He thought about how often people were judged for their appearances or their quiet nature, how many voices went unheard simply because they didn't fit what the world expected. Here was a young girl, standing confidently in her own silence, and yet commanding attention more than anyone else in the room. It made him reflect on his own life, on how he had learned to navigate fame without letting it define who he was. Meanwhile, the girl remained calm, her eyes occasionally glancing at the crowd, noting the smiles, the whispers, and the laughter. She was aware of the attention she was drawing, but she didn't react with vanity or fear. Her silence wasn't a weakness. It was a choice, a way to protect herself and maintain control over how the world perceived her. Keanu admired that, even from a distance. There was strength in her stillness, a quiet confidence that made her stand out without needing words. As the evening went on, Keanu found himself moving slightly closer to her, drawn by curiosity and genuine admiration. He wondered what it would be like to talk to her, to hear her voice for the first time. But he also realized that perhaps the silence itself was part of her charm, part of her story. He didn't want to break that. He wanted to understand it, to respect it, so he remained patient, sitting quietly nearby, observing her and enjoying the simple presence of someone so unique. People around them continued to whisper. Some were fascinated, some confused, some intrigued. The young girl's mysterious aura made her unforgettable, and those who noticed her couldn't stop talking about her long after leaving the party. But Keanu wasn't interested in the gossip or the spectacle. For him, it wasn't about fame or mystery. It was about the person before him, a human being navigating the world in her own way, silently with grace and quiet strength. By the end of the evening, the girl still hadn't spoken a word. Yet she had left an impression on everyone around her, not through conversation or charm, but simply through her presence. Keanu realized that sometimes words weren't necessary to communicate, to connect, or to leave a lasting impact. He left the event with a sense of wonder, curious about who she really was, and hoping that one day he might hear her speak and learn more about the person behind the silent gaze. Little did he know. The story behind her silence, and the truth about who she really was, would soon surprise him in ways he could never have imagined. The next morning, the images and whispers from the charity event lingered in Keanu's mind. He couldn't stop thinking about the young girl in the corner, the one everyone had nicknamed the Mute Vampire Queen's daughter. Her stillness, her mysterious aura, and her intense gaze had left a lasting impression. Unlike many encounters he had with fans or strangers, this felt different. There was something about her silence that spoke louder than words ever could. Keanu had seen people try to break through with attention, with jokes, or with compliments, but she had chosen a different path. She hadn't moved for anyone except when she chose to. She hadn't spoken for anyone except when she wanted to. That choice, that quiet strength, fascinated him. He remembered the faint smile she had given him, just enough to acknowledge his presence, but never more than that. It was a delicate balance, a subtle signal that she was aware but still in control. That day, Keanu couldn't stop replaying the moment in his head. He thought about the countless people in the world who never felt truly seen, who had to navigate life silently because no one listened. And here was a girl who had turned silence into power. Her stillness had drawn attention, not because it was forced, but because it was authentic. He realized how rare it was to meet someone so young who understood themselves in a way most adults did not. Meanwhile, the young girl returned home after the event, walking quietly through the city streets. Her mother, a well-known actress, had taught her from a very young age the importance of maintaining privacy and choosing carefully when to reveal personal moments. That was why she had stayed silent at the event. She didn't need anyone to tell her she was interesting or unique. She already knew. She had learned that sometimes words could distract from presence, that silence could carry meaning far deeper than conversation. At home, she thought about the people she had observed at the event. Some were loud, trying to impress, while others were polite but distracted. And then there was Keanu, calm, thoughtful, genuine. Even though he hadn't forced conversation or made grand gestures, she could feel his respect and curiosity. He hadn't treated her like a spectacle, and that mattered. It was rare to meet someone who noticed more than appearances. She realized that, even without words, a connection had formed between them. Subtle, yet real, the next few days were filled with reflection for both of them. Keanu went about his usual routines, but his mind often wandered back to that quiet corner of the hall, to the girl who had left such a lasting impression. He found himself thinking about what it would be like to speak with her, to hear her thoughts and feelings, to understand what made her so calm in a world that often demanded noise and attention. He realized that this encounter wasn't just about curiosity, it was about respect, admiration, and a desire to connect with someone who saw the world differently. The girl, on the other hand, spent her days practicing small gestures to communicate without words. She had always been aware of her presence, of the signals she could send without speaking. A tilt of the head, a gentle blink, a subtle smile, all of these were tools she had mastered over the years. She thought about Keanu and how he had responded to her silence. Unlike others who tried to force attention or provoke a reaction, he had simply observed, acknowledged, and respected her. That respect meant more to her than words ever could. At school, she noticed that some of her classmates were curious about her. They whispered, exchanged glances, and tried to figure out who she really was. Some were kind, some were nosy, and some were downright rude. But she had learned early on to focus on the people who mattered, those who treated her as a person, not a mystery to solve. The encounter with Keanu reinforced this idea, that genuine connections were based on understanding, not assumptions. Back in Los Angeles, news of the charity event began to circulate. Photographs of the attendees appeared online, and some sharp-eyed viewers noticed the young girl standing silently in the corner. Social media buzzed with speculation. Who was she? Why was she there? Why hadn't she spoken? The nickname, the Mute Vampire Queen's Daughter, quickly spread, gaining attention across forums and fan pages. People speculated endlessly, creating stories and theories that ranged from fanciful to outright absurd. Despite all the attention, the girl remained grounded. She didn't seek the spotlight, didn't chase the curiosity, and didn't feel compelled to explain herself. Her silence wasn't a shield of fear. It was a statement of independence. She knew who she was, and she didn't need validation from anyone else. That strength, quietly held within her, was what had drawn Keanu in the first place. It wasn't just her appearance or the mystery. It was the courage to remain herself, even when surrounded by people eager to define her. For Keanu, the more he thought about her, the more he realized that silence could be more powerful than words. He remembered conversations he had had over the years, moments when people had tried to impress, to convince, or to perform. He understood that words alone were not enough to truly connect with someone. Presence, respect, attention, these were the true tools of communication. And the young girl had mastered them effortlessly. A few days later, Keanu found himself attending another event. And though it was a different crowd and a different setting, he noticed that the impression the girl had left stayed with him. He spoke to colleagues and friends about the encounter, not to gossip or show off, but to reflect on the remarkable way someone so young could navigate the world with confidence and quiet power. He found himself wondering if the girl realized how much she had already influenced him, simply by being herself. Meanwhile, the girl prepared for her next public appearance. Her mother had taught her the importance of timing and intention, that sometimes silence spoke louder than words, and sometimes words carried a weight that could change everything. She knew that if she chose to speak, it would matter. She thought about Keanu and the moment he had acknowledged her presence. That interaction, though small and wordless, had been profound. It reminded her that genuine attention was rare and precious, and it encouraged her to consider how she wanted to share herself with the world. Over time, the girl's quiet strength began to gain recognition, even without her speaking. People who observed her noticed the calm way she moved through spaces, the deliberate nature of her actions, and the intensity in her gaze. She became an example of how presence could command attention without force, how authenticity could outshine spectacle. And yet she remained grounded, understanding that attention was not the goal. Being true to herself was. As the days passed, Keanu couldn't help but think about what it would be like if she did speak. What stories might she tell? What thoughts, feelings, and experiences might she share? He imagined her voice, soft, measured, thoughtful, matching the way she carried herself. The anticipation of that moment, whenever it would come, filled him with a quiet excitement. It wasn't about fame or curiosity. It was about genuine human connection. The rare kind that happens when someone dares to be completely themselves. One afternoon, the The girl walked through a quiet garden, reflecting on the recent events. She thought about the people she had observed, the whispers, the speculation, and the assumptions. She also thought about Keanu and the subtle, respectful way he had interacted with her. It was clear to her that he understood something fundamental, that being seen didn't always require words, and that respect and attention could speak louder than conversation. That understanding gave her a sense of peace and confidence, reinforcing the idea that she could navigate the world on her own terms, back in the city. Life continued for Keanu as usual, but the memory of the young girl lingered. He often found himself pausing in conversations, reflecting on how rare it was to encounter someone who communicated so much without speaking. He realized that life was full of moments like this, quiet, subtle, and often unnoticed, yet profoundly meaningful. It reminded him to pay attention, to observe, and to appreciate the depth in people's silence as well as in their words. Then one day, as he prepared for a film rehearsal, Keanu received an unexpected message. It wasn't long or detailed, just a simple note informing him that the young girl would be attending another event he might visit. That small piece of information brought a sense of anticipation he hadn't expected. He thought about how he would greet her, what gestures might communicate understanding, and how to respect her silence while acknowledging her presence. It was clear that something meaningful was beginning to form between them, even if it was still unspoken. The girl, on her side, felt a mix of curiosity and caution. She had remained silent for so long, yet she sensed that this interaction with Keanu was different. He wasn't like the others. He didn't try to draw attention to himself or to her. His calm observation and genuine interest made her consider whether she might finally speak, even just a few words. The idea both excited and frightened her. Because speaking meant revealing a part of herself she had kept private for so long. As the day of the event approached, both of them prepared in their own ways. Keanu reflected on how patience, respect, and presence could shape a meaningful connection. The girl considered the weight of her silence, how it had protected her, but also how it might be time to test its limits. Neither knew exactly what would happen, but both felt. The night of the next event arrived, and the city was buzzing with excitement. Lights flickered across the streets, casting long shadows that danced on the pavement. Inside the grand hall, guests moved through the crowd with sparkling gowns and crisp suits, laughter mingling with soft music. Keanu Reeves arrived quietly, as he always did, slipping through the room without drawing unnecessary attention. But his mind wasn't on the event itself. It was on the young girl he had seen days ago. The one who had left such a lasting impression. He scanned the room carefully, his eyes moving past the chatter and the familiar faces, looking for the corner where she might stand. And there she was, just as before, standing with poise and stillness, calm in a room full of noise. Even from a distance, her presence was magnetic. Guests turned to look, curious and a little hesitant, whispering about her unusual appearance. But Keanu didn't notice them. His attention was entirely on her. He took a small step closer, careful not to disturb the quiet bubble she seemed to carry around herself. As he approached, he noticed something different this time, a subtle shift in her demeanor. She seemed aware that the moment of silence might soon change. There was a glimmer in her eyes, a faint anticipation, as if she was preparing to do something she had not done before. Keanu, sensing that something significant was about to happen, slowed his steps. He remembered how her silence had spoken volumes before, how it had drawn him in without effort. Now, there was an energy in the air, a tension that suggested the quiet was about to break. And then, in the midst of polite conversation and laughter surrounding them, she finally spoke. Her voice was soft but clear, a delicate melody that cut through the noise without force. "Hello," she said, looking directly at him. The word was simple, yet it carried weight. It was the first time she had spoken publicly, and the sound of her voice held a kind of power that surprised everyone in the room, especially Keanu. He froze for a moment, not out of shock, but because the moment was so rare and pure. Here was a voice that had been silent for so long, and it was directed at him with purpose and intention. The hall fell silent. Guests paused, unsure what had just happened, and their whispers turned into gasps of surprise. Some leaned forward, trying to see who had spoken. The girl's eyes were steady, confident, and unafraid, as if she had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times and was finally ready to reveal herself. Keanu, still processing the sound of her voice, smiled gently, nodding in acknowledgement. The connection they had formed without words was now deepened by this simple greeting. Then came the revelation that left everyone stunned. A guest, standing nearby, whispered almost to themselves, "Wait. She's Sandra Bullock's daughter." The words traveled quickly through the room, and within moments the shock spread like wildfire. Keanu's eyes widened. He had interacted with her without knowing who she truly was, without the influence of fame or assumptions clouding the encounter. The realization made the moment even more remarkable. The girl, now aware that her identity had become known, did not panic. She stood her ground, letting her calm demeanor speak for itself. She explained quietly, but firmly, to those around her, "I have chosen silence because I want to be seen for myself, not because of who my mother is. Tonight I chose to speak because I wanted to, not because I had to." Her words carried conviction. Everyone listened, captivated by her honesty and courage. Keanu, still processing the revelation, felt a deep respect grow even stronger. The girl's decision to remain silent had not been about hiding. It had been about maintaining control over her own story. She had stepped into the world on her own terms, and her first words reflected maturity and thoughtfulness far beyond her years. For Keanu, who had navigated fame himself, this was something he could relate to: the desire to be recognized for one's own choices rather than external expectations. As the evening continued, Keanu took the opportunity to talk with her more closely. Not many words were exchanged, but each one was meaningful. They discussed how people often make assumptions based on appearances, how silence can be powerful, and how courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. The girl shared her thoughts about living in the shadow of a famous parent, about the balance between privacy and expression, and about the lessons she had learned from observing the world quietly. Keanu listened intently, nodding and responding with care. He recognized the depth in her observations and the thoughtfulness in her words. Despite her young age, she had wisdom that many adults lacked. Their conversation flowed naturally, free from the usual distractions of fame and curiosity. For both of them, it was a rare and authentic moment, a genuine connection that wasn't influenced by labels, gossip, or expectation. Outside the hall, news of the revelation began to spread quickly. Cameras, journalists, and social media picked up the story. Headlines hinted at the mysterious girl who had finally spoken and the unexpected connection with Keanu Reeves. Fans and followers were captivated, intrigued not only by her identity but by the way she carried herself. Yet, amidst all the attention, she remained grounded, choosing to respond only when necessary and keeping her focus on meaningful interactions rather than spectacle. Keanu noticed this calmness and admired it. He understood that fame often brings pressure to perform, to react, and to conform. And yet, here was a girl who had mastered the art of navigating attention with grace and authenticity. She had spoken for herself when she chose, and in doing so, had made a lasting impression on everyone present. Keanu felt fortunate to have witnessed it firsthand. The interaction also revealed something unexpected about the people around them. Guests who had initially whispered and speculated began to see the girl differently. They realized that her silence had not been a weakness or an oddity, but a sign of confidence and self-awareness. Keanu's presence, calm and respectful, had allowed her to remain true to herself while still forming a meaningful connection. Together, they had created a small moment of understanding in a room, otherwise filled with chatter and distractions. By the end of the night, the girl's voice had been heard, her identity revealed, and her message understood. Yet, even with all the attention, she remained composed. She thanked Keanu for his patience and respect, acknowledging the subtle ways he had communicated that first evening. "You didn't treat me like a spectacle," she said softly, "and that made all the difference." Keanu smiled, understanding that these simple words captured the essence of their unique connection. After the event, both of them reflected on what had happened. For Keanu, it was a reminder that connection doesn't require grand gestures or long conversations. Sometimes the most profound moments are small, quiet, and intentional. He thought about how people often miss the subtle signals others give, and how much can be learned by simply observing, listening, and respecting someone's space. For the girl, the evening was a milestone. She had spoken for the first time publicly, chosen her words carefully, and shared a piece of herself on her own terms. She realized that silence had been a tool, but speaking had been a choice, a powerful one. She understood that the right moment to reveal herself had arrived, and when it did, the impact was greater than she could have imagined. In the days that followed, the story of the evening spread widely. Social media and entertainment outlets highlighted the girl's calm confidence, her thoughtful words, and the surprising revelation of her identity. Fans praised her courage, noting how rare it was for someone so young to navigate attention with such poise. Keanu, for his part, remained grounded, choosing to appreciate the experience personally rather than publicly. For him, the moment wasn't about headlines or recognition. It was about witnessing genuine human strength and connection. Even as the world buzzed with curiosity, both of them knew that their interaction was special beyond the fame, beyond the mystery, and beyond the whispers. It was a rare bond formed through respect, patience, and understanding, a bond that began in silence and had grown into something meaningful through the simple act of paying attention to one another. As the girl reflected on the evening, she realized something important. Speaking was not the end of her journey, but a step in it. Her silence had taught her about observation, patience, and self-awareness. Her voice had shown her courage, confidence, and the ability to share herself on her own terms. And Keanu's presence had demonstrated that genuine connections are possible. When people respect one another and value authenticity over spectacle, the night had been transformative. For Keanu, it was a reminder of the quiet strength found in unexpected places, and of the lessons learned from observing life without rushing to judge. For the girl, it was proof that her choices mattered, that her silence and her words could both have power, and that she could navigate the world with her own sense of dignity and purpose. And while the world continued to talk about the mute vampire, Queen's daughter, and her first spoken words, both Keanu and the girl understood something far more profound. That true connection isn't about fame, recognition, or curiosity. It's about presence, respect, and the courage to be seen exactly as you are. Whether in silence or in speech, that night became a memory they would both carry forward. A quiet but unforgettable moment that showed how much can be communicated when people troll. After the revelation, the world seemed to shift slightly for both Keanu and the young girl. The evening had been full of surprises, whispers, and curious glances from strangers, but in the quiet moments afterward, something meaningful had started to form between them. Unlike the buzz surrounding them, their connection wasn't built on fame, rumors, or appearances. It was built on understanding, respect, and the quiet acknowledgement of one another's humanity. For Keanu, the days after the event were filled with reflection. He thought about how rare it was to meet someone who carried themselves with such quiet confidence, someone who had the courage to be themselves even in a room full of strangers. The girl's words, though few, had carried depth and intention, revealing a maturity that he found remarkable. It was not just that she had spoken, but the way she had done it, carefully, thoughtfully, and without pretense, that left an impression on him. Meanwhile, the girl also reflected on the evening and her own experience. Speaking publicly for the first time had been a step outside her comfort zone, yet it had been a choice she had made on her own. She realized that speaking was not about attention but about being seen authentically. Her silence had protected her for so long, and now her voice had allowed her to express herself in a way that had been carefully measured and meaningful. For her, it was a confirmation that she could navigate the world on her own terms. Balancing privacy with presence, the connection between Keanu and the girl began to deepen naturally, without the pressure of expectations. They started exchanging small gestures and smiles whenever they encountered one another at events. It wasn't always about words. Sometimes it was a simple nod, a subtle glance, or a shared understanding in the way they looked at a crowded room. These moments were powerful because they were genuine, unforced, and grounded in respect. One afternoon, they found themselves seated near one another at a small gathering. Unlike the previous events, this one was quieter, more intimate. Keanu struck up a conversation, not about fame or curiosity, but about life, choices, and the small lessons people often overlook. He spoke about the importance of observing, listening, and understanding rather than rushing to judge. The girl listened carefully, occasionally responding with short but meaningful comments that reflected her thoughtfulness and insight. "You notice things others don't," she said softly at one point, "and that makes a difference. You don't just see what people show on the surface." Keanu smiled, appreciating the observation. "Sometimes it takes quiet moments to understand people," he replied. "Silence often tells more than words." Their conversation flowed naturally, touching on experiences, lessons, and observations about the world. They spoke about the pressures of public life, the importance of staying true to oneself, and the courage required to resist external expectations. Even in a room full of people, they seemed to exist in their own space. Connected not through spectacle, but through shared understanding, the girl shared insights about her upbringing, the lessons her mother had taught her, and the ways she had learned to navigate attention while maintaining her identity. She explained that silence had been a tool, a way to observe the world without being overwhelmed, and that speaking now was a deliberate choice. Keanu listened, genuinely engaged, respecting her boundaries while recognizing the wisdom in her perspective. Through these interactions, Keanu realized that their connection was unique. In a world full of assumptions and expectations, here was someone who had mastered the balance between presence and privacy. She had taught him something subtle yet profound, that connection doesn't always require conversation, and that respect, observation, and genuine attention are often more meaningful than words. The girl also learned from Keanu. She admired the way he carried himself, humble, attentive, and genuine. He didn't try to impress or dominate the conversation. He simply listened, acknowledged, and responded thoughtfully. His calm presence was reassuring, showing her that meaningful connections could exist even amidst public attention and curiosity. She began to trust him more, realizing that he valued her for who she was, not for her identity or her family. As the days turned into weeks, their interactions continued in subtle, meaningful ways. They attended events, shared small conversations, and exchanged thoughtful glances across crowded rooms. Each encounter reinforced the bond they were building, a bond grounded in authenticity, understanding, and mutual respect. Neither felt the need to perform or impress. Their connection was based on genuine human interaction, not expectations or assumptions. One evening, after a particularly lively event, Keanu and the girl found themselves walking outside together. The streets were quiet, lit softly by street lamps, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of the city at night. For a moment, they walked side by side in silence, appreciating the calm after the evening's activity. "It's strange," the girl said finally, breaking the quiet. "People always assume things about me, about who I am, who my mother is, what I should do, but no one really asks how I feel." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "I know that feeling. People see what they want to see, and sometimes it's hard to be recognized for who you really are. But you've done something remarkable. You've stayed true to yourself." She smiled faintly, appreciating his words. It wasn't often that someone truly acknowledged her experience without judgment or expectation. That small recognition reinforced her confidence and deepened the trust she felt in him. They continued walking, sharing small stories and observations about the world. The conversation was easy, flowing naturally, and yet meaningful. They discussed the value of patience, the lessons learned from quiet observation, and the importance of choosing when to speak and when to listen. It was a conversation that could have taken place between old friends. Despite the difference in their experiences and ages, over time, their bond became more than just mutual respect. It became a source of encouragement and understanding. Keanu offered guidance when appropriate, sharing reflections on life and experience without imposing his views. The girl, in turn, shared her perspective, offering insights that were thoughtful and unexpectedly profound. Each encounter left them both with a sense of connection that was rare and meaningful. Their friendship also revealed a deeper lesson about perception. People around them often assumed that the girl's silence indicated shyness, weakness, or mystery. But in reality, her silence had been a choice, a form of quiet strength. Keanu's recognition of that choice allowed her to feel seen for who she was, rather than for the assumptions others made. Their bond demonstrated how understanding and respect could transform relationships, even in a world filled with noise, judgment, and expectation. As the weeks went on, the girl began to speak more freely in appropriate settings, testing the boundaries of her own comfort and expressing herself thoughtfully. Keanu supported her in these moments, offering encouragement and reassurance without pressuring her. He admired her courage and the way she navigated attention while remaining authentic. Each word she spoke was deliberate and meaningful, a reflection of her inner strength and wisdom. Their growing connection also inspired those around them. People noticed the genuine understanding between Keanu and the girl, and many were reminded of the power of patience, respect, and observation in forming relationships. In a world often obsessed with appearance and performance, their interactions were a quiet reminder that authenticity and attention to one another could create profound connections. One day, the girl shared a personal reflection with Keanu. "I've learned that silence isn't emptiness," she said softly. "It's space to understand, to see clearly, and to choose carefully when to speak. Speaking is powerful, but only if it comes from intention." Keanu nodded, impressed by her insight. "Exactly. Words matter, but presence matters more. And you've shown both in your own way." That simple exchange encapsulated the essence of their bond, a relationship built not on spectacle, fame, or assumptions, but on mutual respect, understanding, and authentic human connection. Their interactions were a lesson in empathy, patience, and the power of quiet strength. As time passed, the girl's confidence grew, not because of attention or recognition, but because she had learned to navigate the world on her own terms, guided by her own principles. Keanu remained a supportive presence, offering wisdom and understanding, reinforcing the lessons she had learned. Together, they demonstrated that meaningful relationships are forged not through words alone, but through attention, respect, and the courage to remain true to oneself. By the end of Part 4, their bond had become undeniable. They shared quiet conversations, subtle gestures, and mutual understanding that transcended the noise of the world around them. Each encounter left a lasting impact, reinforcing the idea that genuine connection doesn't require spectacle, assumption, or expectation. It requires patience, empathy, and the courage to be seen, truly seen, by another person. In this quiet, understated way, their relationship had become a remarkable story of understanding, trust, and growth. It was a story that would remain with them both, shaping the way they approached people, life, and the challenges of navigating attention and expectation. And while the world continued to speculate and whisper about the girl's identity and her first words, Keanu and the girl Kay, the days following the girl's first public words were filled with reflection, growth, and quiet excitement. Even though the world buzzed with speculation about her identity, her silence, and the connection she had formed with Keanu Reeves, both of them knew that what truly mattered wasn't the headlines or whispers, but the bond they had created. It was rare, delicate, and built on something far deeper than fame or curiosity. It was built on respect, understanding, and authenticity. Keanu continued his routine, attending events and working on his projects, but his mind often wandered back to the girl. He thought about her calm presence, the way she observed the world with care, and the courage it had taken to speak publicly for the first time. He realized that sometimes the smallest gestures leave the biggest impressions. A nod, a smile, or a moment of attention could mean more than words, and in that moment, he felt fortunate to have experienced it firsthand. The girl, on her side, reflected on the journey she had been on. She had learned to navigate the world quietly, to protect her identity while still engaging meaningfully with people. Her silence had been her shield, but speaking had been her choice, a step she had taken carefully. The reaction of the world, the surprise, and even the attention had not shaken her. It had only confirmed that she could maintain control of her own story, choosing when and how to reveal herself. Over time, their bond became something rare and significant. It wasn't built on frequent meetings or grand gestures. It was built on small, meaningful interactions. Each conversation, whether filled with words or carried through gestures, strengthened their understanding of each other. Keanu admired her ability to observe, reflect, and communicate thoughtfully. The girl admired his humility, patience, and genuine interest in seeing the world through her perspective. They began to spend more time together, in quiet settings away from the noise and glare of the public eye. Sometimes it was a walk in the park, other times a simple conversation over coffee. These moments allowed them to share insights, experiences, and reflections that neither would have shared in the midst of a crowd. They talked about life, about mistakes and lessons, about fear and courage. Every word mattered, but even in the silences between them, understanding grew. One afternoon, as they walked along a quiet street lined with autumn trees, the girl reflected on the changes in her life. "I never realized how much silence could teach me," she said softly. "I thought speaking was always the answer, but sometimes just observing, just being present, is more important." Keanu smiled. "You've learned something most people take a lifetime to understand. There's power in silence, but also in knowing when to use your voice. You've found that balance already, and it shows in everything you do." The girl paused, letting his words sink in. She realized that their connection wasn't just about shared moments. It was about learning from each other. Keanu had taught her patience and the value of genuine observation, while she had reminded him of the strength and clarity that comes from quiet reflection. Together, they had created something that was rare in a world full of noise, a true and human connection. As their bond grew, the girl began to navigate her public presence with more confidence. She spoke carefully, choosing moments where her voice mattered most. When she spoke, it was thoughtful and deliberate, never forced or performative. Keanu continued to support her, offering encouragement without overstepping boundaries. Their relationship became a source of strength for both of them, a reminder that meaningful connections are built through respect and authenticity, not spectacle or expectation. The impact of their connection extended beyond themselves. Friends, family, and those who observed their interactions began to notice the quiet power of their relationship. They saw how respect, patience, and understanding could foster growth, confidence, and trust. The girl's courage to speak and Keanu's willingness to listen became an example of how human interaction can be both powerful and gentle, meaningful and authentic. One evening, as the city lights reflected on the streets and a soft breeze moved through the trees, the girl reflected on the journey she had taken. From the silent observer in the corner of a crowded room to someone who could speak thoughtfully and be heard, she realized how much she had grown. She understood that her silence had not been a weakness but a tool, and her voice was not just a gift but a choice. She had learned to balance presence with expression, observation with action, and thoughtfulness with courage. Keanu, walking beside her, noticed the change as well. He saw her confidence, her poise, and the way she engaged with the world in a calm, measured way. It was clear that she had grown not because of attention or fame, but because of her own choices and the lessons she had learned along the way. He felt proud, not in a paternal way, but in the sense of admiration for someone who had learned to navigate life with wisdom and authenticity at such a young age. Their friendship also highlighted a deeper truth, that connection and understanding are not about words alone. It's about presence, attention, and respect. They had shared experiences that went beyond conversation, learning to communicate through gestures, expressions, and quiet moments of reflection. Their bond demonstrated that human interaction, when rooted in authenticity and care, can be far more profound than what is often shown on the surface. As weeks turned into months, the girl continued to explore her voice and presence. She began speaking in settings where her thoughts could inspire others, always mindful of her intentions and the impact of her words. Keanu continued to observe and support, recognizing that her growth was not about recognition, but about becoming the person she wanted to be. Together, they had created a foundation of trust and understanding that would carry them through future challenges and experiences. One afternoon, they sat together in a quiet garden, surrounded by the sounds of nature and the soft rustle of leaves. The girl spoke about her hopes, fears, and dreams. She talked about the pressures of being seen as the child of a famous parent, and how she had learned to maintain her own identity amidst the curiosity and attention of others. Keanu listened attentively, offering reflections but never judgment, showing through his presence that understanding and support could be more powerful than any advice. "You've taught me something important?" the girl said finally, looking at him. "That connection isn't about how much attention someone gives you or how loudly you speak. It's about seeing each other, really seeing each other, and respecting that." Keanu nodded, a gentle smile on his face. "Exactly. That's the kind of connection that lasts. The kind that shapes who you are, not because of recognition, but because it's real." As the sun began to set, casting warm light across the garden, both of them reflected on how far they had come. From the initial meeting at the charity event, to the first spoken words, to the growing understanding and bond between them, their journey had been quiet but transformative. They had learned from each other, inspired each other, and created a connection that went beyond curiosity, gossip, or appearances. The story of the girl's first words and her connection with Keanu soon spread far and wide. Headlines and social media posts focused on the revelation and the unusual friendship. But for both of them, the headlines were secondary. What mattered was the trust, respect, and understanding that had grown between them. It was a reminder that true connection doesn't come from spectacle or attention. It comes from seeing people for who they are and valuing that authenticity. In the weeks that followed, the girl continued to navigate the world with confidence. She spoke thoughtfully, observed carefully, and engaged meaningfully, always maintaining the balance she had learned. Keanu continued to be a quiet presence in her life, offering support, insight, and understanding whenever needed. Their bond became a source of stability and inspiration, a reminder that human connections are strongest when they are built on authenticity, respect, and care. Looking back, both of them realized that their meeting had been more than chance. It had been a moment that changed them, teaching lessons about courage, patience, and understanding. The girl had learned that silence could be powerful, but so could speaking with intention. Keanu had learned that observing and respecting someone's space can create a connection deeper than any words or gestures alone. Together, they had experienced a rare and meaningful friendship that would stay with them for years to come. In the end, the girl's story wasn't about fame, identity, or public attention. It was about courage, choice, and authenticity. Her journey from silence to speech had inspired those who witnessed it, and her bond with Keanu had shown that connection is not measured by words alone, but by understanding, presence, and respect. They had created something extraordinary, a human story of quiet strength, thoughtful expression, and genuine connection that would be remembered not for gossip or headlines, but for its heart and meaning. And while the world continued to talk about the girl, her silence, and her first spoken words, Keanu and she carried something far more valuable, a shared understanding of life, courage, and authenticity. Their friendship became a quiet testament to the power of seeing one another, truly seeing one another and valuing that connection above everything else. That night, as the city lights glimmered in the distance, both of them reflected on tea.